custody arrangements in cases where families are that have parents from two different racial backgrounds. So I'd like to first introduce you to these two individuals over here. Kimberly Vandeper and Blue Edwards. They had a brief relationship, and then they parented a child, Elijah, and both of them wanted custody of their child. Now, Edwards, along with some interveners, argued that given that he is a black male and Elijah, their child, is likely to be viewed by third-party individuals as a black male, that he is would be or a better parent or more qualified to nurture Elijah's minority identity and to help Elijah cope with potential racial discrimination or bias that he may face. But ultimately, after a lot of various court proceedings where custody was awarded back and forth to the mother and the father, the Supreme Court of Canada actually awarded custody to the mother. And the Supreme Court stated that, while race is an important issue, it is one of many factors to consider when awarding custody to the child and thinking of the best interest of the child. So this case really resonated with me, and this is just one example of many cases alike that show that there is an intersectionality between race and gender, and that there's variation in to what degree people believe that race should be an important factor when considering custody allocation in such in mixed race romantic relationships. And so I was really interested in studying this further, and what is the intersectionality between race and gender when it comes to custody allocations, particularly given that divorce can be such a traumatizing event for children, and this can add another layer of potential stress for parents and can then affect their quality of parenting, and also can add potential added stress for children. Now, when we consider gender, we know that there's a gender bias in favor of awarding custody to the woman. This is just one example of a study by Canton and colleagues from 2014, where they looked at over 10,000 couples in Wisconsin and looked at their custody arrangements in real divorce cases. And what you see here is that the mother is awarded sole custody most often, and the father is hardly ever awarded sole custody. In between the two, there's equal shared custody and unequal shared custody, but interestingly, in the unequal shared custody instance, over 80% of children in those cases still spend the majority of their time with the mother. So there's certainly a bias in favor of the mother when it comes to child custody arrangements. But the new part that I'd like to talk about is the relevance of race in these types of cases. So I'm just going to use these photos here just to help depict some potential hypotheses that I'm going to set up. So this is an Asian Caucasian biracial child, and those two couples just represent the potential racial makeup of her potential parents. So she may have an East Asian father with a Caucasian mother, or an East Asian mother with a Caucasian father. Now, one consideration may be how third-party individuals would categorize this child upon seeing her, and research on hypodescent and minority bias indicate that she is more likely to not be categorized as white. So according to hypodescent, she is more likely to be categorized by third-party individuals as having the racial background of her minority parent. So in this case, Asian but not white, and then more recently, the minority bias hypothesis suggested that she may be categorized as being part of some sort of a minority, although less likely to be categorized as white. So if this is the case, then we could form an argument that perhaps the East Asian parent in both of these types of couples would be preferred because they would be viewed as being experts at having a minority identity, being able to nurture a minority identity, and being able to help the child and personally empathize with coping with potential discrimination or racial bias throughout the lifespan. Now, a competing hypothesis can also be formed when looking at the racial position model. So according to the racial position model, Caucasian individuals inhabit well, we all know, as we just saw in the talk, that they do tend to have some privileges, and they tend to be pretty high on the social hierarchy, and also they tend to be viewed as quite culturally prototypical of a North American individual. And they self-report and also are perceived as having little to no, or experiencing little to no racial bias. So given this position of, I guess, advantages or social advantages that Caucasian individuals might have, people could potentially reason that Caucasian individuals or the Caucasian parents may have more advantages, such as employment opportunities that a minority parent might not, and so therefore may prefer the Caucasian parent. Also important to consider, though, is the racial background of the perceivers themselves. So we know there's a huge body of literature on in-group favoritism, whereby people prefer members of their own in-group as opposed to members of out-groups. And so given this, we may predict that East Asian individuals may prefer the East Asian parent, and Caucasian individuals may prefer the Caucasian parent. Also, it would be interesting to test what third-party individuals, so non-East Asian minorities, where they would like to allocate custody. So this brings me to the current study, where I wanted to test where people from different racial groups would assign child custody. And we focused on East Asian Caucasian couples because this is the most common type of romantic relationship in Canada where this research was conducted. We also wanted to know what evaluations of each parent independently people made, and the evaluations of the child. So what sorts of consequences people perceive the child would experience as a function of the parenting of each individual parent. So we analyzed data from 338 participants, about a third of whom were Caucasian, a third East Asian, and a third non-East Asian minorities or other minorities. We collected data from students and community members in Toronto. And our gender breakdown was pretty good. We had about a third of our sample was males, and the average age was about 20 years old. And here's the summary of the overall design and the n sizes in each cell. So the participants were either, we had a 2x3 between subjects design, where the participants were either Caucasian or East Asian or part of another minority racial background. And they either read about and answered all questions about a Caucasian mother and an East Asian father, or about an East Asian mother and a Caucasian father. So after providing consent, participants read this vignette. A recent divorce case that appeared before the courts involved a couple who was fighting for primary custody over their 4-year-old child. Both the Caucasian or East Asian, depending on the condition, mother and the East Asian or Caucasian father had stable sources of income, safe home environments, and a positive relationship with their child. Both parents were also mentally, physically, economically, and emotionally stable. And then there was a second paragraph that went on indicating that the parents were moving to 2 separate towns, and therefore the child needed to be primarily placed with one parent, and so a judge needed to allocate primary custody to one parent only. After this, participants responded to a number of outcome measures, so I'm just going to give you an overview of what they are, and then I'll go into further details as I roll out the results, because there are a lot of outcomes in this study. So first, participants allocated custody to either the mother or the father. Then they made ratings of each parent separately, and this was counterbalanced between participants as to which parent they evaluated first. And finally, they made ratings of the child. Okay, so first for custody allocation, this was the question participants answered. As a judge presiding over this case, which parent would you award primary custody to? So they simply selected the mother or the father. Okay, so let me orient you to the graph before getting into the results, but this is a logistic regression, and in this case we found a main effect of the couple that participants read about. So I know this looks like an interaction, but it is not. So first of all, you see, so on the y-axis, it's the probability of selecting a given parent. So higher values means a greater chance of selecting that parent. Now keep in mind, for any given couple, so on the x-axis you see the 2 couples, the Caucasian mother, East Asian father on the left, East Asian mother, Caucasian father on the right. Purple bars represent father and green bars represent mother, and this will be a similar setup throughout the rest of the results. So keep in mind, for any given couple, as participants select the mother, that means they're not selecting the father. So as the green bar goes up, the purple bar goes down, and those two bars add up to 1. So really this is a main effect. And in particular, in this case, what we see here is that there was over a 2-fold increase in the likelihood that participants would select the mother if she was East Asian compared to when she was Caucasian. And as you can see, there's also a gender effect, so people are selecting the mother significantly more than the father. So when the mother is East Asian, almost everyone selects the mother, and hardly anyone selects the father. But when the mother is Caucasian, about 3/4 of the participants selected the mother, and only 1/4 selected the father. Okay, is this moving along? I don't know what happened.
Are you pressing the down one or the up one?
I'm trying both at this point. Oh no. I don't know because it's changing here but not here. I don't know what that means. Shoot. I don't know what could possibly be happening.
I should call Davey. Okay. I can take a look at that. Oh, wait, no. Okay.
Interesting. Okay.
Did you get hit?
No. What happened to you?
Might be time to get Davey. Oh.
Okay.
Right.
I don't know why.
Okay.
All right, so next for evaluations of parents. So there were 3 different outcome measures here. So the first simply parents' ability, so how good or bad of a parent each individual target parent is. So here's a sample item. I think the mother or the father will make a good parent. There were 23 items here. And then there were a list of characteristics, and they're listed here, and those were actually representing competence or race. So there were 4 characteristics for competence and 4 for race, for warmth. And for all of these outcome measures, participants made ratings on a 1 to 7 Likert scale, whereby higher values meant greater parenting abilities or better parenting, more competent and warmer. Okay, so we actually found a 2-way interaction here between the parent's gender and the couple type that participants read about. So in both cases, the mother was actually perceived to be the better parent over the father. However, the effect is large for the East Asian mother and Caucasian father, while the effect is small for the Caucasian mother and East Asian father. And there were no other actually significant differences. So it doesn't look like an interaction, but I think it's a difference in the effect sizes. For perceived competence, we see that the East Asian mother is perceived as significantly more competent than the Caucasian father, but you'll notice there's no significant difference between the Caucasian mother and the East Asian father in terms of competence evaluations. Furthermore, the East Asian mother is perceived as significantly more competent than the Caucasian mother, and the East Asian father as marginally more competent than the Caucasian father. And for warmth, we just found a main effect of gender, whereby the mothers were always perceived as more warm than fathers, which is in line with gender stereotypes. Okay, and finally for evaluations of the child. First, participants made predictions about which parent they believed that the child would prefer. And there were 3 items here, so here's a sample item. Which parent do you think the child identifies with more? So since this question's a bit different than the others, I'm just showing you the scale here. Participants actually made responses on a slider scale that ranged from 100% mother and 0% father on one end, all the way to 100% mother, 0% mother and 100% father on the other end. And then finally, participants made ratings of how well adjusted they believe the child will be as a function of, again, each parent separately. Sample item being as a result of the mother's or the father's parenting, the child is well adjusted. And again, this was on a 1 to 7 Likert scale, whereby higher values mean better adjustment. Okay, so this graph has to do with the predicted preference. Now on the y-axis we have child's preference ranging from the bottom 100% mother all the way to the top 100% father, and that red dotted line represents the 50-50%, whereby the child would neither be closer to the mother nor the father. And on the x-axis, it's almost plotting exactly what you've seen before, except now this is the parent that participants actually chose to award custody to. So what we see here is that for both types of couples, participants that chose to award custody to the mother felt that the child would be closer to the mother than participants who awarded custody to the father. And this is, again, significant for East Asian mother, Caucasian fathers, but it's only marginal for Caucasian mother, East Asian father couples. So there's a smaller effect for, or smaller difference between Caucasian mother, East Asian father couples versus East Asian mother, Caucasian father. Furthermore, what's interesting is that the three bars that have the stars on top of them, so the Caucasian mother, East Asian father, and East Asian mother, are all significantly different from that 50-50% line. So participants who awarded custody to one of these three types of parents believed that the child would be closer to the mother, and as opposed to not just closer to the father, but even to that 50-50% line. So even some people that chose to award custody to the father were not necessarily doing that because they thought the child would prefer the father, but may have had other reasons for this. Only the participants that selected the Caucasian father or awarded custody to the Caucasian father do not differ significantly from that 50-50% line, but keep in mind, almost nobody awarded custody to the father. So that's a really low n size, so I would be wary for making any sort of drawing any sort of conclusions based on that bar over there. And for perceived or expected child's adjustment or predicted child's adjustment, we simply found a main effect that participants believed that the child would be better adjusted as a function of the mother's rather than the father's parenting. So to summarize the results, because there were many results, first we found that there was a gender effect for custody allocation and parents' competence, whereby the mothers were viewed as more competent and were awarded more custody more often than the fathers. But that was also interacting with the race of the parent, whereby the East Asian mother was awarded custody more often than the Caucasian mother, and the East Asian father awarded custody more often than the Caucasian father, and a similar pattern ensued for competence. For the rest of the results, overall, if we look at the pattern, we do find a main effect of gender whereby mothers were preferred over fathers, but there were certainly instances where we saw that there actually was a greater difference between East Asian mothers and Caucasian fathers versus Caucasian mothers and East Asian fathers and how they were perceived. So there are several implications to this research. First is that race and gender interact in these sorts of cases, whereby mothers tend to be preferred over fathers, but also East Asians tend to be preferred over Caucasians. And what you may have noticed is I did not mention participants' race in any of the results, and the reason for that is because there were no interactions with participants' race, which was very surprising to me and not at all in line with my hypotheses. And also shows that there could be little and possibly little to no evidence of in-group favoritism going on potentially. And finally, this also has implications for bias against parents, because different people may expect different things from a particular parent. People may believe that there's a greater match between the one parent and the child versus another parent and the child, and this may then affect parents' stress level and then their quality of parenting potentially. And also, this has implications for the first impressions that people make of the child. So depending on what parent they're staying with or they live with, their peers may expect different behaviors from them and behave differently towards these children. I do also just quickly want to mention that I have not forgotten about other types of mixed race couples, and I'm in the process of collecting data from Black Caucasian, or not from, but about perceptions of Black Caucasian types of families and Black East Asian families as well. I'd be interested in talking to you about that maybe next year. So thank you very much. I just want to say thank you to my mentor and collaborator, Allison Chasteen, the Adult Development Lab, and that's my email over there. I'd love to hear from you guys, so thanks very much.